George and Lina sat at the kitchen table, their fingers greasy, their smiles a little too wide in the dim light. The smell of fried chicken filled the cramped room, but tonight, it felt almost suffocating, thick and heavy, clinging to the air. George took a big bite of a drumstick, the crunch echoing too loudly in the silence, as if the house itself was listening. Lina giggled, but her laughter sounded nervous, her small hands trembling as she tried to hold onto a slippery chicken wing. It was their usual Tuesday night tradition. Just the two of them, a bucket of crispy chicken, and for Lina, a rare night without homework. But tonight, something felt off. The sun was setting outside, bleeding the sky with streaks of orange and purple that seemed almost unnatural. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears. Normal was slipping away, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. After swallowing the last bite, George stood up and stretched, but his voice was forced when he said, "All right, time to wash up." He walked to the kitchen sink, turning on the tap. The water gushed out, louder than usual, echoing in the empty house. He grabbed the soap bar, its bright pink color jarring in the gloom, and began to lather his hands, the strawberry scent suddenly sickly sweet. He scrubbed his fingers, his palms, and the backs of his hands, watching the greasy residue swirl down the drain, vanishing into darkness. Lina was still at the table, humming a shaky tune and tracing patterns in a puddle of spilled soda, her eyes darting to the shadows. The only sound was the running water, masking something else, something waiting. Suddenly a thunderous noise shattered the silence. Knock, knock, knock. Each blow was heavy, impatient, and sent a jolt of fear through both George and Lina. George snatched a dish towel, his hands shaking as he dried them. Who could possibly be at the door this late, he thought, dread prickling his skin. He glanced at Lina, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. He crept to the front door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty porch and the street swallowed by night. Heart pounding, he slowly turned the knob and pulled the door open, the hinges creaking like a warning. There on the welcome mat sat a plain cardboard box, no address, no stamps, just a box, waiting in the darkness. George picked it up. It was disturbingly light, as if it contained nothing at all, or something that shouldn't be there. He brought it inside, setting it on the living room floor with a hollow thud that echoed through the house. Lina crept closer, her curiosity battling with fear. "What is it, George?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, eyes huge. "I don't know," he replied, his voice tight. He knelt and slowly opened the flaps. Together they peered inside, breath held. It was empty, or so it seemed. The inside was a void, an impossibly deep black, darker than any shadow, swallowing the light and their courage. "That's weird," Lina whispered, her voice trembling. George grabbed a pencil from a nearby cup. "Let's see how deep it is," he said, barely above a whisper. He lowered the pencil into the box. It never touched the bottom, it just vanished into the inky blackness as if the box was hungry. George hesitated, his hand trembling as he wiggled the pencil above the box. He reached in, but the bottom was gone. His fingers brushed only cold, endless emptiness. It was like plunging his hand into a void that swallowed all light and warmth. He let go. The pencil slipped from his grasp and was devoured by the darkness, gone, as if it had never existed. Lina's gasp shattered the silence, her eyes wide with terror as she stared at the empty box. George stared, heart pounding, into the swirling blackness, his mind racing for an explanation. The darkness inside twisted and churned like a living thing, hungry, patient, waiting. Suddenly a sharp clatter echoed behind them, slicing through the thick silence. They spun, dread prickling their skin. The pencil lay on the floor, possibly far from the box, like it had been spat out by some unseen force. It rolled to a stop at Lina's feet, as if guided by invisible hands. How could that be? The box sat innocently on the table, but George felt its gaze, watching, waiting. Before they could speak, the phone shrieked, its ring slicing through the air like a scream. Both jumped, nerves frayed, as the sound echoed through the house. George stumbled to the phone, desperate for something, anything normal. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice barely steady. "George, it's Callan," came the reply, but the voice sounded distant, distorted as if coming from somewhere far darker. It was Callan, but something in his tone sent a chill through George. "Listen, I need to tell you something," Callan said, his words slow and heavy. "I did a little something for you," he continued, voice dropping lower. "To help with your security, you know. I installed some cameras in your house, they're all set up." The words echoed, cold and invasive. "You can thank me later. Callan said, but the playfulness in his voice felt wrong, twisted. A cold, crawling dread crept up George's spine, icy fingers tightening around his heart. Cameras? In his house? Without his knowledge? The thought made his skin crawl. "What are you talking about, Callan? You can't just do that!" George's voice cracked, fear and anger warring inside him. He felt eyes on him, unseen, unblinking, watching from the shadows. He scanned the room, every shadow now a threat, every corner hiding secrets. Was he being watched right now? Was something else watching too? The safety of home was gone, replaced by a suffocating sense of exposure, of being hunted. It felt like a nightmare, but he was wide awake. Trapped. "Calm down, George, I was just trying to help," Callan said, but his voice was wrong, too calm, too amused. "In fact, it's a good thing I did." Silence stretched. George could hear Callan's breathing, slow, deliberate, on the other end. "Why is it a good thing, Callan?" George whispered, knuckles white, dread pooling in his stomach. Callan's voice dropped to a whisper, urgent and cold, sending ice through George's veins. "Because, George," Callan breathed, "you need to turn around, right now. There's a man standing right behind you." George's blood ran cold, terror flooding every inch of his body. He slammed the phone down, his hand shaking so violently it nearly missed the receiver. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst, each breath ragged and desperate. He was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a primal fear, every muscle locked in place, screaming at him not to move. But he had to look. He had to face whatever horror was behind him. With a trembling breath, he forced himself to turn, every second stretching into eternity. A towering, shadowy figure blocked the doorway, its presence suffocating, the darkness around it almost alive. Dressed in black, a mask hiding his face, only those cold, merciless eyes glared out, eyes that promised violence. The figure glided forward, silent as death. Suddenly he lunged, a blur of menace and speed. Instinct took over. George dodged, barely escaping the attack, and swung wildly, his fist connecting with a sickening thud. The masked man staggered back, snarling in pain, but not defeated. "Lina, run!" George screamed, his voice raw with panic, grabbing her hand in a desperate grip. He didn't wait. He yanked her toward the door, adrenaline and terror blurring his thoughts. They fled, hearts pounding, the sense of being hunted suffocating them, eyes from hidden cameras burning into their backs. Bursting into the cold night, their frantic footsteps echoed like gunshots as they sprinted for the car, every shadow a threat. They scrambled inside, George's hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the keys, panic clawing at his throat. At last the key turned, the engine roared, a lifeline in the darkness. He slammed the car into reverse, tires shrieking as they tore out of the driveway, desperate to escape. Lina sobbed beside him, her whole body shaking, terror etched on her face. George's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, expecting to see the masked man in pursuit, but the street was eerily empty. They were safe for now, but the feeling of being hunted clung to them, thick and suffocating, every shadow a possible threat. He couldn't just run, he had to fight back. He flicked on the radio, desperate for any distraction, but a news report cut through the static, chilling him to the bone. "Reports are coming in from all over the city," the reporter warned, her voice grave. "A sophisticated hacker is hijacking home security cameras, using them to stomach twisted with dread. Callan. It had to be Callan. He snatched up his phone, fingers fumbling, and punched in 911. "Police!" he gasped, voice cracking with fear. "Someone hacked my cameras! There's a man in my house! He attacked us! We barely escaped!" He blurted out his address, words tumbling over each other, panic and adrenaline surging as he pleaded for help. Help was on the way, but the night felt colder than ever. George kept driving, hands trembling on the wheel, desperate to put as much distance as possible between them and the house that no longer felt like home. He circled the block, heart pounding, until the street was awash in the harsh glare of red and blue lights. Police cars screeched to a halt, their arrival shattering the silence. Officers leapt out, weapons drawn, moving like shadows as they surrounded the house. George and Lina watched from the car, breath fogging the windows, afraid to even whisper. They saw the officers slip inside, swallowed by the darkness beyond the door. Minutes crawled by before the officers emerged, dragging the man in the black mask, his eyes wild even behind the cuffs. Then, to George's horror, they pulled a second figure from a van across the street. Callan, his face pale and expressionless. With the immediate threat gone, George drove back, but the house loomed ahead like a dark, silent warning. A police officer explained what had happened, but his words felt thin, unable to push back the dread. Callan was the hacker, orchestrating the break-in from his van, watching them the whole time. The mysterious box was just bait, a trap to lure them out, to see if they were vulnerable. Rage twisted inside George, but beneath it, fear gnawed at him. He dialed Callan's number, but it rang uselessly in an officer's evidence bag. Still, he left a voicemail, his voice shaking. "You're not my friend, Callan," he whispered, voice low and trembling. "This isn't over. I'll get you back for this," he promised, but the words felt hollow in the darkness. "You can count on it." But as he hung up, a chill ran down his spine. This was just the beginning. An hour later, the police were gone, their lights fading into the night. The house was silent, but the quiet was suffocating, heavy with the memory of what had happened. George and Lina huddled on the sofa, wrapped in blankets, shivering from something colder than the air. The box was gone, but its absence felt like a wound. The man and Callan were in custody, but that brought no comfort. Relief never came. Instead, a shadow of dread crept over them, thick and unshakable. Lina stared at the spot where the masked man had stood, her eyes wide and haunted. George tried to smile, but his lips barely moved. They both knew the truth. The police had caught the intruders, but the real threat was still out there. The news spoke of a hacker, but what if there were more? What if they were never truly alone? Callan was caught, but was he just the beginning? What if others were watching, waiting for their chance? What if their cameras were still compromised, their every move still being watched? The feeling of unseen eyes lingered, crawling along the walls, hiding in the shadows. It crept through the corners, whispering that safety was only an illusion. They were safe, for now, but the silence felt like a warning, not a comfort. As they sat in the darkness, a cold certainty settled in George's heart. The nightmare was far from over. Something was still out there, watching, waiting. The real terror was just beginning. To be continued.